Do you actually know where metalcore came from? Not the bands that made it popular in the 2000s like Killswitch and As I Lay Dying. I'm talking about the true originators who forged this genre in sweaty basements and rundown dive bars in the 1990s. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the 7 most important albums that created the metalcore blueprint. Now walk with me. Now, before I get started, let me just say there's no way to possibly cover all the albums and all the bands and all the, eras that really kind of formulated the metalcore genre as we know it. So below in the description, I've included a list of other albums that may not get mentioned in here, but are still equally as important to, creating the sound that we love in metalcore. So please enjoy and let's get started. You know that breakdown in your favorite metalcore song, the one that makes you want to punch a hole in your wall or mosh in your living room? Well, it can probably be traced back to a vegan straight edge band in the early 90s. Yes, we're talking about Earth Crisis from Syracuse, New York. This is a band whose impact can't be overstated. Just ask this guy. But in all seriousness, their vegan straight edge philosophy influenced an entire generation of hardcore kids, and sonically, they changed the game. It only took 3 songs off 1993's Firestorm EP to kick off a new chapter in heavy music. Listen to it and you can hear the conviction and aggression of a hardcore band declaring war against drug use and animal cruelty. But maybe more importantly, you can hear a sharper edge to the riffs. Those palm-muted staccato breakdowns with the metallic edge became the blueprint for basically every breakdown that followed. And the riffs were decidedly more metal than their predecessors like, say, Gorilla Biscuits or Youth of Today. Just a couple years later, Earth Crisis continued to build on this metallic hardcore sound with 1995's Destroy the Machines. Like, how can you not think of bands like Slayer or Megadeth or any of the big thrash bands when you hear that? It's just a little more chunky and groovy. Around the same time, over in Southern California, Strife was doing something similar with their album One Truth. Now let me make it clear, Strife is not a metal band, they are not a metalcore band, but they had their contributions. They were playing hardcore with the technical precision of a metal band. So when I hear icons of metalcore like Adam D from Killswitch talking about being a hardcore kid that, just liked metal, I think of a band like Strife and how that was probably in rotation for him. And hardcore came from punk and had this chaotic element to it. Early bands like Black Flag created the sensation that everything was splitting at the seams. But with Strife, you had tight, rhythmic breakdowns mixed with precise riffing. That's one of the pillars of metalcore right there. If you showed both of these bands to a guitar player raised on Sepultura or Pantera, it's not hard to see how they could put their own spin on it to create a metalcore sound. You can even connect the dots to bands like Vision of Disorder, Aftershock, and Adamantium, who are on record as hardcore kids who happened to like metal too. But it wasn't always about hardcore aggression with some metal riffs thrown in for fun. This is where Sweden enters the chat. They dropped this melodic atom bomb that ingrained itself in the DNA of metalcore. As I'm sure you've probably guessed by now, I'm talking about the one, the only, Slaughter of the Soul by At the Gates. Now, this album wasn't just influential. Listen to what Malcolm Dome of Revolver had to say years ago. Without At the Gates' landmark record, the entire new wave of Swedish death metal, bands like In Flames, Soilwork, and Arch Enemy wouldn't be the same. And modern metalcore, everyone from As I Lay Dying to Killswitch Engage to All That Remains and the Black Dahlia Murder wouldn't even exist. And you know what? That's not hyperbole. I loved all of those bands for years before discovering At the Gates. Then one day a friend put Slaughter of the Soul on my iPod and suddenly everything made sense. At the Gates created this perfect sonic cocktail that nobody had really figured out before. It was brutal as hell, but with these razor-sharp melodies that resonate with remarkable clarity. It's not as abrasive as death metal, but it hits just as hard. That's the Swedish recipe. And I remember in the 2000s, calling a band At the Gates worship wasn't even an insult. It was basically a genre tag. And by that notion, At the Gates was a full decade ahead of its time. A once-in-a-generation type band. But while everyone was losing it over At the Gates, another Swedish band was quietly crafting the other half of the equation. In Flames Flames dropped the Jester Race in 1996 and infused the same melody with softer dynamics and power metal influence. The melodies were still memorable, but more nuanced. It's easy to see where guitarists like Adam D and Matt Heafy got their inspiration from when you hear this album. Everything about these bands was as sharp as a knife's edge. Every note, every harmony, every bass line, every guitar riff, it was methodical. In contrast to the raw aggression of a hardcore band, I would describe it as more surgical. It took steady hands to write riffs with so much technical prowess, but also so much sonic clarity. Even the vocals were noticeably more practiced. It was controlled screaming with range as opposed to the unfettered yelling of early hardcore. This was a sign of what was to come in metalcore. And yet, it wasn't always about clarity and order. Chaos is a core tenet of the genre. So let's take a trip back to the US to look at what was simmering in the underground. For some bands, chaos is the whole damn point. While the Swedes were perfecting with melodic precision, bands like Converge were creating something that felt like exposing a raw nerve. Just listen to this. That's an assault on your nervous system, and it explores a brace of sounds that create this intense sense of friction. But somehow, I guess just because it's Converge, it works. So when Converge dropped Petitioning the Empty Sky, I can imagine most listeners couldn't process what they were hearing. The music was disorienting in the best possible way. Jacob Bannon's vocals emerged as primal expressions of pure emotion, kind of like an exorcism happening in real time. And Kurt Ballou explored new territories on guitar with piercing dissonance. It's as if he was deliberately avoiding accessibility. But Converge wasn't the only band that was breaking sound barriers and damaging eardrums. In Tacoma, Washington, Botch was forging their own path. Their debut album, American Nervoso, and all their material for that matter, remains forward-thinking decades later. Modern bands cite them as hugely influential, yet they probably couldn't write this material if they tried. Botch created something exceptional. It's like this frenetic punk energy, this hardcore aggression, but the technical prowess of a metal band, and it really just opened up all these new possibilities in heavy music. Now, real quick, I want to pause here to talk about a lesser-known band. Over in Virginia, there was a band called Spitfire. They deserve special recognition with their album The Dead Next Door. The vocals feel unhinged, and so do the riffs. It has the same energy as bands like Botch and Converge, though we don't really think of them and put them in the same bucket. On tracks like the 248 Lie, they pushed boundaries that would influence countless other bands, and specifically in the Christian metalcore genre. So before you go listen to Norma Jean next time, just pause for a second and go look up Spitfire. The controlled chaos of these bands echoed for years after. You can hear it in Pure Before's experimental riffs, Every Time I Die's Southern Fried Mayhem, and early Architects with their technical precision. They handed the next generation a blueprint for making metal and hardcore transcend simple breakdowns and melody. So as we've now seen, these 7 albums literally created the blueprint for metalcore before it even had a name. And that's the crazy thing about musical evolution. These bands weren't sitting around thinking, let's create a new genre. They were just making the heaviest shit they could with what they had. Albums like Tear from the Red, Pass the Flask, and Hidden Hands of a Sadist Nation changed my life. And they all trace back to the uninhibited ambition and creativity of these bands doing it in the 90s. That's the legacy of innovation. Make something honest and truthful to your own creativity, and it'll last forever.